everyone. Can you hear and see me okay? Is this working? Can you just say something in the chat if you could hear and see me? I know there's a delay, so. Oh, thank you. Okay, good. All right, and can you see like a endless tunnel of things, of the live stream thing? Cool, okay, so we should be all right. Thank you for coming back, or tuning in anew to Cross-Stitch Cartography, Take 2. Big thanks to Daniel Hoffman for not only organizing this, but for calling me and talking me through some ad hoc tech support. We made it work, so hello. We can get started, I guess, and I'll stop apologizing. So, hello, I'm Vicki Johnson. I'm a cartographer in Washington, D.C., and I'm coming to you live from a drum kit, and my notes are on a cat scratching post, teleworking rules. But since I spend so much time in front of a computer, I found it very helpful to have an activity that I can do outside of looking at a screen, which is sort of funny because this whole thing is like, here's something you can do with screens. But, you know, I picked up cross-stitching. I learned it initially from my grandmother, Ruth, and she was an avid stitcher. She adorned all kinds of things, things like this lovely bird napkin, a lot of florals, a lot of very intricate things, but my favorite, the one nearest and dearest to my heart, is this cross-stitch on plastic trick-or-treat bag, which is now where I keep my cross-stitch supplies. Very nice. And I realized one good thing about a delayed stream is that I forgot to include a slide or some information of what a cross-stitch pattern looks like. And a cross-stitch pattern looks like this. I'll hold it up to the weird camera. It's a grid with a bunch of colored squares. And you use this as a guide when stitching. Each little square is a little X, a little crossed stitch. There's another way of doing it. I like the colored blocks. There's the other way is a bunch of symbols. And if I hold this like real close to the camera, maybe you can tell that's ampersands and hearts. It looks like a bunch of cartoon squares. I find the colored blocks easier to follow, and because this is my demo, we're going to do colored blocks. All right, so you no longer need to see my face for this, and the camera is at such a great angle to just like look at my neck. Nora Ephron would be proud. So let's go to some slides, and after the slides, just a few of them, we'll go to a live demo. All right, we are now at slides. Hopefully you can still hear and see me because I can no longer see the chat. Slideshow from beginning. Great. So, little set of slides before we get to work. But I was saying about cross-stitch and cartography, I'm obviously not the first person to make the connection that there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of extremely cool modern cross-stitch cartography out there. The multi-talented John Nelson's new ArcGIS Pro style creates a cross-stitch look all within ArcGIS Pro. It's super cool. Probably the thing that's going to get me to learn ArcGIS Pro. Things like Autumn Painter's embroidery. This is just dizzyingly and gorgeously detailed, and all of the land are all tiny French knots. Each little loop of green there is a very tiny knot. It's incredibly cool and very, very time-consuming. Things like Judith A. Tyner. She's a brilliant academic scholar. Part of her body of work includes Stitching the World, which is a history of embroidered maps and women's geographical education. Maps and cross-stitch, they're both storytelling instruments. So here, for example, is an intricate Hmong story cloth from the Minnesota Historical Society depicting the flight of the Hmong from Laos into Thailand during the Civil War in the middle of last century. This was stitched in 1985. And you can see going across the Mekong River, a refugee camp, studying English, and then finally leaving through the airport. It's a different kind of map, and it's just very beautiful. There's a lot of these story cloths, both in map and non-map form. This is the cover image that I used for the presentation, a sort of charmingly messy world map from late 1976. I'm pivoting to this kind of stitchwork mapping, as geography was the first sort of science taught to mostly wealthy, mostly white, young British and American girls in the late 17 and early 1800s. There was sort of a fad to stitch their knowledge onto cloth, creating these things called map samplers, as a way to demonstrate both geographic knowledge and household skills for personal betterment, as well as for future employment or marriage. Here's one that's a little bit more local in scope. This is currently in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's a British farm from the 1970s. Nope, from the 1790s. Here's a close-up of some detail. I just like how the legend is done. I think it's pretty cool. There are even cross-stitch globes being made. This is from the Westtown School, which is a Quaker boarding school in Pennsylvania. And this map sampler was stitched by 14-year-old Elizabeth Ann Golden in 1829. It's a 191-year-old piece of cartographic embroidery, and it's in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, and we're going to create a pattern for it today. Obviously, you do not have to use a map sampler to create a map sampler. You can create a map sampler of anything, but I thought it would be fun to replicate the pattern digitally, and it gives me an excuse to tie in a little history, which I love doing. So cross-stitch patterns, the data sources that I'm using are Natural Earth for the county and state borders and rivers and lakes, and the U.S. Census Bureau for the counties. Elizabeth Ann, according to the Cooper Hewitt, likely used this map published by Anthony Finley in 1824. And they cite the visual similarities of the two maps as a clue there, and also that both list the same population number from 1820. So many map samplers at this time used pre-printed cloth, which would be just a piece of cotton or silk with the outline on it, and the girls would stitch over it. She may have traced the Finley map. She may have done this freehand. It may be a pattern. It's sort of hard to tell. We are going to use a pattern because we do not have to prove our geographic or embroidery knowledge in order to make ourselves more attractive to potential suitors. So let's open up ARC or whatever software you use. For this, you really only need to be able to lay out the geographic stuff. You don't need to do any fancy analysis. So like I said, the data sources are Natural Earth and the U.S. Census Bureau. I overlaid Elizabeth Ann's map, and any variance overall can be kind of attributed to either a 14-year-old working with cloth or my own slapdash georeferencing, because not much has changed county-wise in New York State since the 1820s. There's Wyoming County and Orleans County over here. Schuyler County is also new, and a little detail here. The Goldens lived in Watkins Glen, which is at the southern tip of Seneca Lake, which is right here, if you can see my cursor. If not, take a guess. It's the longest of the Finger Lakes. So that might explain why the map kind of peters out downstate. She may have gotten halfway through the map and realized she ran out of cloth for New England, or not New England, Long Island. But she does in the text right here mention that Long Island is the most important island in the state. So, I don't know, maybe that's a little stitcher's remorse. But to create the pattern, you pare your map down to the basics. Color absolutely does not matter. You just need the basic outline, And then make sure the colors are very different and add a thick black outline to each. So I'm going to add a thick black outline to, when I say thick, 1 point is fine. Thick black outline to each of the layers, which are here. Oops, not the fill color. The states and provinces to cover the rest of the map. Lakes from Natural Earth again, and counties. Before I forget, you have to make sure the page size matches. So the Cooper Hewitt doesn't list the dimensions of Elizabeth Ann's map, but given that the lettering, which is also stitched, is very clearly legible, I guessed that it was 2 feet long and 1.5 feet high. This is where you make the call on your design's size. So if you know the dimensions of your cloth, pop them in here now. And if you don't, just, some guesswork is fine. Okay. So I probably should have put a close-up of the cloth on the slides. There are a couple of different types of cloth and of plastic sheet grids, like my childhood tote. I've only ever used Aida cloth, which I might be pronouncing wrong. It's spelled A-I-D-A. It's a stiff cotton fabric woven evenly to create a grid of squares for stitches. It's given a count, which is the number of stitches per inch. So if you see 10 count Aida, that means 10 little squares, 10 little stitches per inch. So, okay, we're going to export this as a JPEG. You can see my test runs right there. So New York State laws. Okay. And then it's time to Photoshop. So what we're going to do is create a new document. Match the width and height to what you did in ARC or your cartography software. So here it's 24:18, portrait or landscape orientation, and then the stitches per inch, it will be the resolution here, because we're going to make 1 pixel for each stitch. So it's 10 count Aida, we'll do 10 pixels per inch. Go ahead and create. Now open up your JPEG. You can see my weird filing system here. Oh, here we go. Okay, there's probably a better way to do this next step. This isn't how I typically use Photoshop, and I'll probably figure out a better way to do it eventually, but duplicate the layer to your blank document. Duplicate the layer right here. Turn off the background. Then go to image size and change the resolution to 10. Then duplicate that to your new one. So now we have, I'm going to trash that one that I did by accident, a resolution 10 map of New York State. So if you go in real close, you can see each of the pixels, and each of those will be a stitch. It is so fuzzy. You can see how the stitches are going to work here. All the pink ones would be pink thread if you're doing a fill. And honestly, you could stop here if you wanted to. There's enough information that you could probably figure it out on the fly as you stitch. You could kind of just eyeball it, but we can refine it, and we will, because we've got plenty of time. So, whoops, you get that a lot. You're going to select a color range. We'll do the pink step first. And you can just kind of play with the fuzziness until it's just about right in the box. And what we want are the areas that are pink to show up as white in the selection image. So you don't want it to be too little around the edges, and we don't want it to be too much around the edges. That seems right-ish. It's never the same every time. There's no magic number here. You just kind of have to feel it out. Okay, it's all selected. And then you go to Control J to make a new layer. Now you just have this layer. So Control A, oops. Love to do stuff on the fly. Isn't it fun? Deselect, and then make sure you have the layer selected. Then Control A click will just select all the pixels with the color. And then you can change the color, whatever you want. If you didn't like the arc export or want to make it a little bit more vibrant, maybe make it a little bit brighter. So you pick the color, make sure it's mode normal, opacity 100, and you do not want to preserve transparency. Click OK, click OK, and there you have it. And then you do that for each of the other layers. So you select, and then go right back to color range, sample the color, play with the fuzziness until you're happy that all of the white area is all of the beige area in this case. Click OK. Same thing, Control J to create a new layer with just that selection. You can turn off everything else. Select the layer. Control A, oops, I want to move it over. Control A click will just select the colored pixels. Nope. I'm sure it's clear to someone what I'm doing wrong here, but, well, it's fine. Deselect. Okay, we'll do the water next. Select color range, click on the water. Make sure you have your layer selected. It's like having someone watching over your shoulder. You always spell things wrong when someone's watching you type. All right. Color range. Play with this. We'll make sure we get the lakes in there. Not too much else. Okay. So, blue is selected. New layer. The reason I'm putting these into new layers is it just makes it easier for me to mess around with. It may not be the case for you. You can always do things however you're. I practiced this many times. Anyways. Theoretically, this would give you a brighter outline for each individual layer, whereas especially if you're just redoing Elizabeth Ann's, you want to focus mostly on the lines in between, which is why we put the thick line in between the counties. So pull the image back again. Color range. And you want to get the darkest pixels you can for this. And then this you have to be more careful with the fuzziness because you will end up with little artifacts. So with these, when these are selected, instead of creating a new layer and going through that, we'll just do it in here. Color picker, make them black. These you want to be the darkest, as that's where, like the border lines. Select, and now you have a cross-stitch pattern here. You have, when you zoom in, you can see each individual square will be a different color on the map. And now that is how you make a cross-stitch pattern in Illustrator. How are we doing on time? Oops, I know you love to see that. All right. Everything's still going okay? Can you, I'm assuming you're seeing the live studio thing, or you will be shortly. So if you don't mind just popping a note in the chat. It's still going. Here we go. Okay. The delay on this thing is very confusing to deal with. Well, anyways, I'll just keep going. Since we have about 10 more minutes, because this is very kind of straightforward, let's try a different way of doing it. You can export from Google Earth Engine. I know there's a lot of Google Earth Engine on here. Let's say you didn't want to do a vector map. Let's say you wanted to go raster to raster. Here is a little bit of code that's just the USGS National Land Cover Database. And since we're going with a New York State theme, here's the land cover for Albany, which after a lot of scrolling around while working this out, I found it had just a nice variety of colors. So you can export the image. You can see where I had a lot of mistakes doing it earlier. I pre-exported the image just in case there were any errors on the fly. Do love it on the fly error. You can pull in any raster data and do this exact same process. Here's Albany as a JPEG, or Albany as a raster. So when you zoom in, you can just go right from this into a cross-stitch pattern. It's sort of a natural way of doing things with raster as opposed to vector. But image size, change that resolution from 120 to 10. And now it's a lot smaller and a lot simpler. So if you wanted to do a land cover of Albany cross stitch, you've got a pattern right here. And again, you would want to simplify the colors. So from here, same process as before, color range, select a red pixel, and then play with the fuzziness. And here you have to be a little bit more finicky, because there's a lot of different shades of red as it gets, so the resolution changes. So this, okay, that's actually pretty good. So all the selected ones would be stitched with red thread. Again, you can just go to fill, change the color, make it a more vibrant red if you want. And go through that way and select green, color range, select some darker green pixels. This you might want to make a little, actually there's a lot of green, this is going to be interesting. Select the color range. So they're, these would be ones that would be stitched dark green. Say a lot. I hope someone's keeping track. There, edit, fill, color. You could choose a single dark green. Doesn't have to be the exact color of the thread. And you would go through multiple times through this as you continue to group greens into dark greens and yellows with the yellows. Then you'll end up with a cross-stitch pattern with colors all set for the thread. All right. 25-second delay between chat sent and me seeing it. So you'll hear me saying this in 25 seconds. Amy Rock, good question. converting your first version to raster first, that would probably work as well. I haven't tried it that way. Actually, I first started trying to do this in Illustrator, and doing like a live trace, trying to keep it, I don't know. I'm more familiar with Illustrator as opposed to Photoshop. But I can't see why that wouldn't work. If you try it, please let me know. Michelle, yes, this would work really well for gridded knitting or crochet. Those are two things that I don't know how to do, but I would love to see a gridded knit or crocheted cartography. I think I'm sure there's some that exist already that are super cool. I think you're right. That would solve a lot of the line uncertainty. Perhaps if we ever do cross-stitch cartography, take 3, we can have another set of trial and error. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something, even if it's just how not to do a live stream. Next up, we have Ken Field's take on thematic mapping, which I am super excited for. And then later on, John Nelson, the aforementioned John Nelson, has creator of the cross-stitch pattern for ArcGIS Pro is giving a talk. I'm really looking forward to watching all the presentations that I missed as well while trying to figure this out. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And I'm going to click end stream. So long.